it is fair to say that the last few years in British politics have been, and this is an understatement, turbulent, not exactly a nice day. We've had the Brexit referendum, 2 snap general elections, we've had the rise and fall of Corbynism, we've had the reality of trying to leave the EU. Just ask Theresa May about how difficult that became in practice. We had the proroguing of Parliament, we had a Christmas election. Who would have dreamt we'd have a Prime Minister telling everyone in the country that, oh, by the way, you've got to stay at home for the next year. And then we now know that he went to a few parties himself. Adding to that now a war in Europe. This has been a time of exceptional political flux. And there through it all, explaining every twist and turn to us on the news night after night, has been the BBC's political editor, Laura Kuenssberg. She's been reflecting on the job she's now moving on from. She did 7 years in it. She's got a BBC Sounds podcast called Everything Has Changed. You can get it on the BBC Sounds app, and it's great to have a chance to speak to her. Hi, Laura.
Hi, Jeremy. Hello.
You're going to miss it, aren't you?
Well, what a privilege and honour it was. Wow. And also just what a roller coaster, you know, covering the news in the last 7 years has been extraordinary. Just listening to you listing all of those events there, just, you know, even in the last couple of minutes, it really made my head spin. But, you know, change is good. Time to undo the seatbelt, get off the roller coaster and, you know, have the fun. And another, you know, great honour to sit in the chair on Sunday mornings on BBC One from September. So that's something that I'm hugely looking forward to as well.
Of course. So your programme is called Everything Has Changed, and it's on BBC Sounds. And we can talk a bit about the things that you saw. And I tried to work out how to do this. Basically, you had 7 years, and I've got 7 clips here I haven't heard yet. And if I give you the one word against each clip, you can choose one. So the words are, in no particular order, Corbyn, Brexit, Snap, Johnson, technology, lockdown, parties. You choose one.
OK, let's go Corbyn. Let's be chronological to start with.
OK, all right, let's go Corbyn. Here we go.
Jeremy Corbyn, 251,000...
I guess that's him getting the job, is it?
That's right. That's Jeremy Corbyn being elected Labour leader. And that was such an earthquake in the summer 2015, just after I'd started the job. And it kind of became inevitable in the run-up to that actual announcement. But the whole thing was such a surprise to the sort of political establishment. And it was fascinating because it was such a contradiction. So there were lots and lots of people who joined the Labour Party, thousands and thousands, particularly young people and some people who'd left the party who went back into the fold because they were inspired by Jeremy Corbyn and they wanted to follow him. But at the same time, there were lots of people, particularly in Parliament in the Labour Party, who were really... I mean, horrified sounds a strong word, but some of them were really horrified because they saw him as such an outsider. And it really overturned the status quo in that party. And what happened in the next couple of years after that, you know, the two sides never managed to resolve themselves to each other. And it was a real time of sort of upset and turmoil in the party that, you know, had been in charge, you know, for so long under Tony Blair and then briefly under Gordon Brown. And that moment was massive, and it set the stage for some really big battles.
I kept watching, thinking maybe what Labour's doing, it sort of wants to expunge the whole Tony Blair thing. They don't like their Tony Blair history, and they're trying to show that they're not that party.
Oh, there were loads of people who felt that way. I mean, loads of our listeners will remember that, you know, after particularly the huge tensions and arguments over the Iraq war, there were some people in the Labour Party who, you know, never quite resolved themselves to New Labour. And for them, probably a little bit under Ed Miliband, but then in a huge way under Jeremy Corbyn, bringing someone to the top of the party who'd been very uncomfortable under that whole period, been a serial rebel. You know, they basically put the rebel in charge, and the people who'd previously been in charge, well, they didn't like it very much.
And just, I've lost track of Corbyn slightly, but is he even in the Parliamentary Labour Party now?
Not right now. It's a kind of running sore. So Keir Starmer and his team say that unless he apologises for some of the things that happened, and there's a big row about a particular post on Facebook, then he can't sit as a Labour MP. And there are rumours that they might try to have a new Labour candidate in his constituency. So it's a kind of unresolved row. It's one of the kind of hangovers of all the arguments that, my goodness, you know, when it came to then the big fight in the party over anti-Semitism, people felt it so strongly. There was so much kind of pain and anguish. And in a funny way, over the time that I've been doing that job, in a funny way, that's been such a theme. You know, the stories and the themes that we've been covering have been questions of politics that people have really felt in their gut. You know, whether that was Corbyn or Brexit, I'm sure we'll chat about in a minute. It's really been that kind of period where people felt all this stuff in their bones, you know, real era of political passion, which, of course, led to plenty of bus stops.
OK, 7 years, 7 clips, 6 to go. Parties, lockdown, technology, Johnson, snap, Brexit.
Brexit.
Why did I know you were going to choose this one?
Well, at 20 minutes to 5, we can now say the decision taken in 1975 by this country to join the common market has been reversed by this referendum to leave the EU. The British people have spoken, and the answer is we're out.
Oh, my goodness, I didn't know we were playing that. I was 20 feet from Dimbleby, and I thought, oh, gosh, that's the most major historical moment right in front of me.
Yeah, I mean, it was history being made. And I remember just taking a huge gulp, because what wasn't in that clip, it was after that, David said, Laura, and turned to me. I was like, right,
Yeah.
OK. It was a moment when, for the first time in decades, really, the country had been given a chance, love it or loathe it, to completely transform the status quo, you know, to undo the wiring of how the UK works, because we had been, particularly in economics, but in lots of other ways, particularly when it comes to business, though, we were completely plugged in to the big, huge common market, to the European Union. And the country was given a choice, and the country chose very clearly. It was a tight vote, but a clear vote. You know, everyone knows it was 48-52. But the margin was really clear, and the country chose to overturn the status quo. And you don't see that very often. And it was just such a moment of history. And if you'd been covering the campaign, and particularly if you'd been outside the M25, right, if you'd been covering the campaign and doing what me and my team did, you know, clocking up the miles, speaking to as many people as we could, it wasn't a surprise. You know, it was clear from a couple of weeks into the campaign that the enthusiasm was building on the Leave side, and they had what's sometimes called by American pollsters the big mo, right, the momentum. But the sort of powers that be, you know, the people in the government, David Cameron, George Osborne, other people who'd been involved in the Remain campaign, there was such a sense of shock in Westminster in the early hours of that morning that I'll never forget it. And that side of the argument, people sort of came blinking into the light the next morning while, you know, Nigel Farage took him and his, you know, supporters to Westminster. They were parading around. They just couldn't believe it. They were absolutely cock-a-hoop. And the Vote Leave campaign, which had been the official one with Boris Johnson, of course, well, I remember the next morning, they looked like they couldn't believe it either. But what a moment that was.
A producer just in the corridor yesterday said, you've got to ask the question, what would happen if we reran the vote tomorrow? So let me put that, I said, I don't know. So let me put that to you.
Oh, gosh, I don't know either. I mean, I think that if you look at polling around this, you know, roughly, and I haven't studied any of it very recently, so I don't want to misquote anything. I mean, roughly, the country is roughly still 50-50, right? What there isn't, though, widespread evidence of is appetite for people just to go back to the argument again. Because that's then what happened, and what ended up, in large part, what ended up in the ultimate result of the 2019 election, that Boris Johnson, you know, got this enormous victory. Because actually the public just looked at people screaming at each other in Parliament night after night and just get on with it, which is why, you know, that slogan, Get Brexit Done, which was the sort of successor of Take Back Control, had such power. Because the sort of parliamentary system just kind of couldn't cope with it. And I don't sense really that there's a widespread appetite just to have the argument again. OK, clips to come. Snap, technology, lockdown, Johnson, parties. Which would you like, Laura? Let's do technology, because this has been one of the really profound things that's happened. All right, let's hear this one.
Technology has changed politics hugely. I mean, I would not have been a household name without YouTube.
And we had all these young people flood into the campaign with ideas and techniques I'd never even heard of. And I said, well, let's try it. And it was all social media, Twitter, and you name it, you know, Facebook in particular. Targeting, they knew how to target. Games. We set up a group called Games for the Many, and they invented games that people could play that would lead them into a political debate and support for Jeremy.
So that's Farage and McDonnell, but what's the key point there? That's absolutely right. Well, the key point is that from 2015 up until 2022,
technology, the fact that everyone's walking along with a sort of mini supercomputer in their pocket, right, has completely changed how political campaigns are run, whether it was Jeremy Corbyn's campaign or whether it was the Vote Leave campaign. They've also changed how politicians talk to each other, how we all talk to them. They've even changed the practicalities of, you know, what happens in Parliament. So if you sit up in the press gallery in the Houses of Commons, very sort of grand wood-panelled press gallery that's almost up at the roof, and you look down, MPs have all got their heads down because they're all sitting staring at their phone and staring at Twitter. So it's speeded politics up. It's changed how campaigns are run. It's meant that it's easier for campaigners to get to the public, you know, through their social media, through their Facebook, through their Twitter, through their Instagram. As John McDonnell was saying, you know, even through targeting video games. It's also, though, I'm afraid to say, made it easier for kind of, you know, bile and unpleasantness actually to spin around a place in politics, because as we all know, and you've talked about it on the programme loads of times, people will say things to each other online that they wouldn't dream of saying to each other face to face. And that's been one of the kind of nasty side effects of, you know, what's been quite exciting is the expansion of technology, but it has allowed a sort of nastiness to come into politics in a quicker way.
Let's play some music. We thought we should play the song of the political editor, which wasn't expecting that, and we'll talk a bit more after this with Laura Kuenssberg.
Surprise.
So,
by surprise, I wasn't expecting that.
Jamie Lawson wasn't expecting that. Laura Kuenssberg is with us, the outgoing political editor of the BBC after an amazing 7 years. Just a couple of comments for you, Laura. Wendy in Shoebury says, can you ask her if she's not doing any more work outdoors, could I have a couple of her coats? So, your fab coats, she says.
Oh, do you know, I was going to leave a few of them in the office for my successor, but the wonderful Chris Mason's got the gig, so I'm not quite sure that a magenta overcoat is going to be his style. You never know.
Andrew Edwards in Camberwell says, please give my warm congratulations to Laura on getting the Sunday morning Andrew Marr gig, setting the week's news agenda. I'm sure she'll soon make 9 a.m. Sundays her home, and if all sides are complaining, you're doing fine. Ian in Norwich says, please thank Laura for me. She's been brilliant at her job. And reading those three comments from our lovely listeners just makes me think, gosh, the social media thing, and I see what you have to put up with, isn't the world. It's not reality. It's just hostile, but it's not how most people are.
Well, it was one of the things we were just chatting about before that song, right? I mean, your technology enables people to say things to each other that they'd never say face to face. But really, my favourite thing about the job has always been actually when you go out on election campaigns and you spend, 6-7 weeks on the road and you meet as many people as you can. And well, it was David Cameron who said, Twitter isn't Britain. And I think, social media it is a real thing. It's with us. There are good things about it. There's quite a lot of downsides about it, but it's not the real world. And I think there's quite an easy thing. I mean, I've said this before, but if you sit obsessively looking for people saying mean things about you, it's just not a very good use of your time, really, is it? And it's not the world. So I think we can all have a dose of healthy scepticism about what we see online, which is, frankly, as journalists, what we should have anyway. Healthy scepticism, not cynicism, but scepticism.
Yeah. OK, clips left. Snap, Johnson, lockdown, parties.
I think I've got to say lockdown, really.
All right, let me just move to that. Lockdown. Let's just hear this one.
From this evening, I must give the British people a very simple instruction. You must stay at home. Because the critical thing we must do to stop the disease spreading between households.
Wow. March 2020, Laura.
It sends a chill up your spine, doesn't it? And it makes me think of that day and being in the newsroom. And Westminster had already emptied out. We were in that sort of shadow zone, the shadowlands between being in full lockdown and having been advised to already everybody to reduce their contact and those kinds of things. And it makes me think, Jeremy, also just of a conversation I had with a cabinet minister about a week before. And I said, what's going to happen? This is just, extraordinary. And he said, you know what? We are going to have to get involved in everyone's lives as if we are living in a war. And it's going to be an era where the government's going to have to make all of these decisions for all of us. And essentially they were saying to me, I can't believe that we're going to be in this kind of position. So for, political journalists like me, and sometimes we're accused of being too obsessed by the kind of up and down and the in and out and the gossip and the rumour, we're suddenly in the grip of a genuine national emergency and reporting on a government grappling with that. And I just remember on that night wondering how this was going to affect everybody, but knowing absolutely this was a unique story and event to cover, because it was going to affect every single one of us. Every single one of us. And my goodness, how it did. And I also remember a couple of weeks later, talking to someone in government, and they said, oh, yeah, well, I think, 3-4 months and then hopefully we'll be through it. In fact, the Prime Minister, do you remember he said we'll squash the sombrero in 12 weeks? One of those Boris Johnson metaphors.
Yeah.
And my goodness, we're still living with, we're living with COVID now, aren't we? We're not, it's not gone, it's not in the rearview mirror, although mercifully, touch wood, cross everything, we're through the worst of it. But what a time.
Tell you what, I'll play the next three together. So this is, they say Snap Johnson parties.
Oh,
I don't know what this is going to...
I've been going on, haven't I?
No, but I want to ask you some more personal questions. So let's just play these. Here's Snap.
I have just chaired a meeting of the Cabinet where we agreed that the government should call a general election.
Here's Johnson.
I've just been to see Her Majesty the Queen earlier on, and she agreed to dissolve Parliament for an election. And I want you to know, of course, that I don't want an early election.
This one is labelled parties.
Today I've received a fixed penalty notice from the Metropolitan Police relating to an event in Downing Street on the 19th of June 2020. And
well, Laura, this last one was yesterday, wasn't it, or the day before?
Yeah, the day before, I think. Yeah, gosh, I mean, it's just like that's the reinvention and the roller coaster of the modern Conservative Party. That one of the things about these years is throughout everything, all these huge turmoil, the same political party's been in charge because they've managed to reinvent themselves, in office, and they've been through three prime ministers.
Incredible. Okay, look, sorry, I've got to ask you about you, right? Because you've done this I don't know anything about your personal, so don't worry, but you've done this super tanker job. And, I mean, how do you avoid just, I don't know, being like the guitarist in AC/DC who's still kind of strumming when they throw him in the back of the van? How do you ever switch off?
I think over the time of doing the job, I got better at it. And I think that I've got a pretty clear divide between work and then the rest of my life. Right? And work is work, and I love it, and I've had to work very long hours, and I'm not making a complaint. There's no secret about that, and it's been adrenaline fueled and all the rest. But it's not everything, and I think I've also always tried to do the job with being in the mindset of people at home watching on the sofa. And thinking, well, what do I want to know? What do I want to... Not being a sort of, a kind of big political geek. And, I mean, OK, let's face it, I am a bit of a political geek after this long. But I think my sort of mentality has been always tried to stick to that feeling of being someone who's at home on the sofa and then, putting the phone on a shelf instead of staring at it all the time.
Yeah, but the trouble is this, that you never have diary security, do you? So you say to your partner or whatever, like, OK, it's birthday night tomorrow, I'm taking you out. And then the phone goes. And you ignore
news
the
is
phone?
Unpredictable, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, I'm hoping, having changed my job, that letting the phone go to voicemail is going to be something that I'll be able to do a bit more often.
Did you do it in the last 7 years? Probably not.
Well, the thing is that there were lots of best laid plans, even that politicians had, or we thought things were going to be a bit more stable. For example, Theresa May said, I'm not going to do a general election. I'm not going to do a general election. I'm not going to do an election. I'm not going to do a general election. And then she did a general election, and things happened. And then after the Boris Johnson won his whopping victory in December 2019, at that point, it was like, whoa, there's a government with a big majority. You'll remember covering governments with a big majority, and things can be busy, but relatively stable. Then, of course, we have a pandemic that nobody could have predicted the full horror. So, news has been extraordinarily unpredictable. But I think that's one of the reasons why it's getting off the roller coaster, I think, is a good thing to do, because with news you can't of course, it's part of the job, right? You have to answer the phone, and maybe there were a few moments late at night or very early in the morning, or even on holiday, where I wished I didn't have to answer the phone. But it was a joy to do the job in that period. I feel very lucky.
Well, for sure. I mean, it's the greatest job. And what about distance from politicians? Let's say Keir Starmer rings you and says, Laura, look, let's just put aside our roles, me as opposition leader and you as BBC political editor, come round to my house, let's have a glass of whiskey and let's just talk openly. Can you accept that invitation?
I don't think I've ever been to... I'm just trying to wrap my brains. Look, obviously in politics there is also quite a lot of... because people work late at night, so there's obviously quite a lot of kind of, I suppose, a sort of social aspect, but I don't mean social as in you'd go for fun, like social as in because basically what you do is you talk to people all day long. But I've never been a journalist I don't spend my weekends hanging out with politicians. I never have, and I no offence to any of them who might be listening, I don't think I ever would do. It's kind of not my...
But would you...
I wasn't...
Could you become... No, just I mean, and I've worked at a junior level down in Westminster, and there are some... The politicians who are the problem are not the ones you don't like. They're the ones you like. Because you feel, oh gosh, I could be friends with this person. And you think, no, hang on a second, we need distance here. And it's quite difficult, isn't it?
I'm not sure. Well, I don't. Maybe I'm a cold and terrible person, but I don't think I've ever thought, I think I could be mates with them.
Okay, there are 650. There must be one or two you thought, I quite like this person.
Yeah, but I think, particularly working at the BBC, you have that inbuilt separation, right? And I think, there's a way. Sometimes you think about this sort of metaphor before, right? The way a doctor would treat different patients, they don't treat patients differently because they think, well, that person's come in and they've been a bit brusque and maybe they're not very friendly, or that person's come in and they've been very friendly. And, of course there are nice people who work in politics, right? Of course there are. And, of course, politicians aren't all, dastardly devils. But I think as a journalist, one of the things that you hold absolutely to the core, and, having worked at the BBC for a long time, is that you don't ever allow any of your personal feelings to get in the way of that. That doesn't mean that you're not a human being, when the camera goes off or when you go home at night. And, of course, sometimes you might think, gosh, I feel some sympathy for that person finding themselves in that particular predicament, or... Because, most of them at least start out trying to do the right thing, It doesn't mean they then do the right thing or are able to do the right things. But I think, the sort of notion of, to sound a bit old-fashioned, I think the notion of public service for politicians is often very obviously and strongly present. But that doesn't mean I ever went home and thought, oh, I wish we could be friends instead of me giving them a tough interview. I don't think I've ever had that feeling, but maybe that means
The question probably says too much
mean.
about me, yeah. Desperate for friends wherever I go. Just one more, okay, which is a lot of our maybe older listeners, my age and above, the defining political editor before yourself was John Cole, right? And partly because of the fall of Thatcher, which was massive. Legend, yeah. Now, John spent basically all day long in the Houses of Parliament talking to people, and then he would give you a 2 or 3 minute piece on the 9 o'clock news that was gold. Do you ever feel jealous of that routine where you can actually have the space to get deeper?
Well, I'm not sure that we don't also get deeper, right? So I think to assume that you don't, because we have more content, to use the buzzword, right? So obviously we're on the radio, we're on the TV, we're writing for online, we do podcasts, all of those kinds of things. I would still spend sort of all day, every day, talking to politicians, more or less constantly. So, sometimes, look, would it be great if there were extra hours in the day? Of course. But just because you're doing more outlets, or, chatting to you guys on Radio 2, or talking to Steve Wright, or talking to, 5 Live and the news, it doesn't mean that you can't really get under the skin. And, one of the great, I've been able to do some great things where we really have done that. So, during the Brexit process, we did 2 big documentaries actually going alongside, and that were really in depth and spending lots of time with people. Or, in my last weeks, I've done the podcast, and actually there's a version on iPlayer as well. And what it probably means, Jeremy, actually, is I'm afraid, rather than giving up the idea of getting under people's skin, is we've just worked lots and lots of extra hours in order to be able to do that. But, you know, as you rightly say, John Cole's an absolute legend. And that kind of reporting in a different era certainly had massive value. But also they must have had lots and lots of extra stuff that never got to air.
Yeah, true.
And then maybe now just we have more outlets and therefore more of this sort of behind-the-scenes stuff, like we chat about on newscasts, for example, more of that gets out into the public domain. You know, we know more now. And I think as a result, I think the public get more information now, rather than just, you know, a two-minute summary, wonderful though they were. Yeah, a 2-minute summary of someone's take and someone's view, and now we're just, you know, surrounded by information all the time, which is, I think also journalists now have a different role too, is kind of to be the guide through all that information, rather than just to give a sort of distilled summary of what's going on.
Thank you so much, Laura, for talking to us so candidly. Really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah, congrats
Take
on
care.
the 7 years. Wow. And good luck with the next job.
Thank you.